Today we're joined by Chris Smith, who's the head of soccer, head of the Soccer Academy at Celtic FC. So a very well-known team all around the world, and particularly obviously in Scotland as well. So we thank him very much for his time tonight.
No worries. Thanks for having me. Nice to catch up. Looking forward to the conversation.
Absolutely. Chris, can you tell us a little bit about yourself and your history in football?
Yeah, so a little bit about myself. I started with Celtic about 16 months ago, and previous to that, I'll touch on the Celtic role in a little bit more detail, but previous to that I worked for the Scottish FA for 12 years. I held a number of roles there, mostly within football development, which incorporates a lot of coach education as well, and latterly working with the national teams. So I had a spell as assistant coach with our men's national futsal team, and then 3 years working in the women's national team setup, both as assistant coach with our under-17 national team and scouting for the women's A squad. So a pretty kind of robust kind of background with the Scottish FA, and then that led to I moved to Celtic about 16 months ago, which was pretty challenging because I started the job day one of lockdown in Scotland 16 months ago. So I met all of my team day one via Zoom, and then some of them are furloughed the kind of 3 days into the job. So a pretty challenging start. But my role now is head of Soccer Academy. So I head up a team of 4 staff, and together we manage the kind of the relationships and the programs that we deliver for all of our international partner clubs around the world, and all the kind of community delivery that we do in Scotland as well.
Beautiful. Beautiful. So in terms of the soccer academies, how many do you guys have how many locations rather do you have in Scotland and abroad?
Yeah, so the best way to describe it is I almost look at the programme in kind of 2 facets. We have what we do in Scotland, which I kind of term as our domestic programme, which is essentially our soccer centres, that we manage, our holiday programmes, and we're about to launch a kind of club partnership programme in Scotland as well. So that is almost kind of termed as one, and then the second part we have is what we do internationally. So we have around about 45, 50 partner clubs all over the world, USA, Canada, we have a lot in Ireland, Northern Ireland, we have a few in Europe, we have 6 in Australia, and a couple of others dotted about the place. So yeah, we've got like the international arm of it, and then we've got the domestic arm of it. So it's pretty big, it's pretty robust.
Absolutely, absolutely. So you mentioned that you've got six programs here in Australia. Do you have any based in Sydney?
Yeah, we have a couple of partnerships in Sydney with QG White Tigers and Newington College. Most of the international partners, essentially what we do with those international partners is to try and support them to kind of grow and develop. So a lot of the support that we'll offer will be in areas of either coach education, player development, team training, generally around those kind of three main pillars, and really just looking to kind of help them grow their program, help them develop, because ultimately what we're looking for those clubs to do is become a little bit stronger so they can provide better opportunities for their younger players and their coaches coming through the systems. Absolutely,
which is always a fantastic initiative. I mean, particularly as a coach myself in the MPL, I find that coaching education is absolutely paramount, because there is no substitute for a good education. And if you're getting it from someone like yourself who has such vast levels of experience, it is an absolute godsend. So to find it by yourself here in Australia particularly is often very, very difficult. So kudos to you for all the work. Yeah, I mean, the coach education is for me is probably one of the biggest things that we have started to offer in the last 18 months. We always done a little bit of it previously, but it probably wasn't as consistent. Probably that wasn't as well defined as it is now. That's just how the program's evolved over a little bit of time. But I think a lot of coaches think that to develop players is about putting on good drills and good practices in the pitch, which you can find from Twitter, from Google, from anywhere you want, but that's not what makes the drills good. Like coaching for me is learning how to engage with the players and learning how to understand what makes the players tick, inspire them to want to learn and want to practice on their own, and understanding all that comes through coach education. So that one of the biggest things I think we can offer going forward is really working with the coaches of all of our partner clubs to make them better. And the quicker we can make them better, then the quicker they'll see an impact on the players that they're working with. And ultimately, that's what we're all here to do, is to try and give players an opportunity to go and enjoy the game and go and develop and reach the pinnacle that they want to reach.
So
absolutely. Now, in terms of the programs that you have here in Australia, have you had any players or any sort of coaching staff that have moved on to the Celtic FC Academy in Scotland?
No, so it's not quite how it works. So the partnerships that we have with our clubs all around the world aren't designed as like talent centres or talent ID centres where we're looking to try and pick up players and bring them to Celtic. It's not really what we're looking at. Like, the main purpose of our club partnership programme is to connect with our fan base around the world, give a little bit back in terms of our knowledge and our expertise, which hopefully supports our partner clubs to kind of grow and develop, which ultimately helps the kind of brand of Celtic and keeps that name out there. So as I said, really what we're trying to do is to try and help the clubs grow in their area. There might be a player that comes through at some point, that'd be fantastic, but it's not as if we'll come out to Sydney, for example, we'll partner with a club and we'll sell that club on the idea that we're going to take your best player, drop them into Celtic's Academy, and they're going to become a pro player, because the reality is that's not what we're looking to do. There have been players that have Australian players have been part of Celtic, as you know. At first team level, you had Tom Rogers, is probably the most well-known one at the moment. Yep. Scott McDonald played previously. But I think the only player that's kind of come through our academy system is Jackson Irving, who's obviously a current international with Australia. He started off in the system and then kind of dotted about a couple of other clubs. So there's not any players that we've picked directly that have come in and been part of the academy setup. We do offer for some of our partner clubs one of the programs they can be part of. Essentially, is an academy experience. So we have had 3 or 4 players come from a couple of our partners in Australia who've come over to Celtic for a week, and for that week they'll just be embedded in the academy. So depending upon their age, we might, I don't know, if they're 14 years old, they'll go and train with the under 14s for a week. We have a football school at St Ninians, so they'll be embedded in that school for a week. They might get a chance to play in a couple of games. So we do offer that experience to come in and be part of the academy, but that is designed to provide those players with a development opportunity, a chance to go and learn, a chance to really experience what it's like in that professional academy, and take that back to their teammates back in Australia, and hopefully they can then drip feed a little bit of their information down. So we do have that as an option, as an academy experience and a development opportunity. But as I said, it's not something we look to do, which is try and pick up players from our partner clubs and hope we can bring them into Celtic.
Sure, absolutely. Okay, so it's kind of like a holistic approach of player education and then coaching education.
Yeah, that's probably a really good way to design it. As I said, like you might find a player at some point who you just think, wow, that player's fantastic, and that sparks a bit of a connection. But I just think it can be a false narrative at times when you're just to try and, when you're looking to partner with a club to sell the club and the fact that we're going to take one of their players over here, and they're going to become a pro player. That's not how it works. The reality of it is that we can help support that club grow and develop in their area. We can make their coaches better, which ultimately makes their players better. We can provide drills and training curriculums and practices that's going to support that. And we can provide support in other areas. So to give you an example, we've got a discussion this afternoon with a nutrition company about coming on board. So we'll be able to offer nutritional support to all of our partner clubs around the world. So we really want to make sure that we provide as much support as we possibly can to give those clubs an opportunity to grow and develop and become as strong as they possibly can in their area.
Absolutely. Oh, that's beautiful. Now, in terms of the Celtic FC Academy itself, can you tell us a little bit more about the structure of the youth academy at the club?
Yeah, no worries. So we've got at Celtic, we've got obviously 2 academies, because we've got the boys' side and the girls' side. The academies start really low. So we have soccer centres, which essentially are kind of participation based, where parents can pay for the players to come along and train. So it's almost just where they drop their kids off to be coached by Celtic coaches, and that's at the community level. And that's the kind of the starting point for players up to roughly the age of 12 years old, who can come along and have a chance to be coached by our coaches. From there, depending upon how good they are, they may have an opportunity to step in our development centres, and then they can then filter into either the boys' academy or the girls' academy. Then we have the kind of pre-academy starts around about 6 or 7, which is a little bit later for the girls, and then that will take them through into the junior academy, which is up until the age of 12. They then go through the kind of youth academy and then into obviously 18s and reserves. The girls are slightly different because their squads, the ages are slightly different. So they start at under 11s and run through to under 19s. But we also have, as I said to you, a school called St Ninians in Scotland, which is essentially is our way of providing the players with a full-time education in football. So if when in Scotland they move to high school around about kind of 12, 13 years old, and at that point there, if they're in Celtic's academy, they will potentially be offered a place at St Ninians, so they'll have a chance to move to a different high school. When they get to that school, football then becomes a subject for them. So alongside doing maths and English and languages and etc., they'll also have a chance to train football once a day. And the idea behind it, again, is essentially to try and provide them with more hours on the pitch, with a hope that when they get to 16 years old, they can be offered a professional contract and they can move full-time in under 18s.
Perfect. Now, in your experience, particularly working with Celtic, have you noticed that, is there a certain percentage of players that end up moving on to the professional sphere from these academy teams?
Yeah, there's a lot of players that actually do make that step up. I think the ones that you may have heard of, or your readers or your listeners, I should say, may have heard of. If you think about current captain Cal McGregor, came right away through the system. You've got James Forrest, came right away through the system. You've got Stephen Welsh, who's a centre back playing at the moment. Kind of broke through last year, has come right away through the system. Kieran Tierney's potentially the most well known, having had that move to Arsenal, having had so many years at Celtic. So we do have a large number of players that are starting to come through that academy structure. And on the girls' side, like again, so the women's game in Scotland's been growing over the last kind of 10 or 12 years. And it's been great to see the club really starting to invest in the women's programme as the game starts to grow in Scotland. We recently appointed Tina Stewart as the girls' academy manager. I think it was around about a year ago now, maybe 15 months ago. Tina's job is obviously to manage the girls' academy. And then just, I think it was about a month ago, we had Chloe Warrington was announced on her first full-time professional contract, and she's one of the first girls to have come through the academy system in the recent years to sign full-time at Celtic, which is great to see. So we're really now, like, the pathway's been there for years in the kind of men's side. We're really now over the last 2 years starting to see some real successive players coming through the girls' side as well. So really exciting times, I think, for both academies going forward.
Absolutely. And I think that a lot of that is actually, it's owing to the strength of the development system, and particularly with grassroots football. I think if you're at a situation where you can kind of cultivate this talent and actually see it grow, then you can actually reap the fruits of the club's labor. But it always starts at a very fundamental level with a good development program, both for girls and boys. I mean, in Australia, as I'm sure you know, we have this sort of ongoing argument about early specialization in football, or whether kids should particularly just focus on football from a young age, where they might start playing at 6, 7, 8 years of age, get to 16, 17, not make one of the top teams, and then they're basically fall into a hole of football, and they never seem to get out of it.
Yeah, you know, early specialisation is a really interesting topic to sit and debate, and I could probably chat with you on it for hours. I think, from my personal opinion on early specialisation, I would argue against it until they get to a point, probably around about 13 or 14. I think that the more sports that young people can play, the better they're going to be athletically, the more all-rounded they're going to be, they're going to decrease their chances of injury. Because they're better athletes. So the more sports that young people can play, the better. I think that there does become a point where you have to specialise. And at football, for me, if you imagine you play in Scotland anyway, we play 4-a-side, 7-a-side, 9-a-side, 11-a-side. And at that point there, when you move to 11-a-side in Scotland, around about 12 or 13, it's at that point there that topic for me starts to come up, and that's when you start to have those discussions. As I said in my previous role where I was working with Scotland under 17s, on the women's side, we had a number of players who would get to kind of 13, 14, 15 who were internationals, both in football, hockey, squash, and at that point there we were starting to have those conversations about them having to specialise, because at some point all the hours of practice need to go into that one sport to make sure that technically you can compete at the highest level. So it is a really interesting topic, and I think the other part around specialisation is that what, in my experience, unless players are fully passionate about football and football only, and they're never going to lose that, then if they specialise too early, their motivation to play the game will start to dip when they go through those teenage years, because we know that there's a lot of other factors that come into young players' lives where it causes them to kind of maybe push football aside. So again, for me, you want them to specialise a little bit later on, so they're still really motivated to play. They still have a chance to really embed the technical and tactical understanding in the game, so that when they get to 16, 17, 18 years old, they've got a real chance of making it as a professional. But as I said, again, every player is slightly different. So I think it's right at the very start, it's about understanding your players, and when you understand your players, you know which ones can specialise early because they're really passionate about it, and some who will have a multitude of sports and it's working well for them, and they maybe specialise a little bit later. But I think you need to have a really broad understanding of that topic to then figure out what's the best situation for each and every individual player, as opposed to trying to group players together.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, on the topic of Celtic players, is there a single identity for what a Celtic player is? So can there be a definition of a typical Celtic player?
I think there can be. I think key for me is having enthusiastic players that are brave, that are willing to get on the ball and they can handle the ball, and not only handle the ball, but handle the ball under pressure. If we look at the Celtic men's team, for example, they play at Celtic Park in front of 60,000 fans. You have to be able to deal with that. So you have to have a mentality to cope with that pressure that the fans can put you under. Celtic are expected to win, and expected to win every single game that they play in. And when you're in that environment, you have to have the resilience to cope with that. But again, when they're on the ball, as I said, we want them to go and express themselves. We're looking for them to be creative. We're looking for them to play with a little bit of speed, play with a little bit of guile, and ultimately excite the fans, because that's what Celtic players should do. So I don't know if there's an exact definition within that, but all those kind of references that I'm speaking about there, when I think about Celtic players of the past and Celtic players that are playing currently, that's what kind of jumps to mind for me.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, in terms of individual training or player development, in your opinion, as a football developer, how vital are things like individualized training sessions? So, to put a bit of context, in Australia, most of our kids train 3 to 4 times a week, if even that, and that is also at the elite levels. Obviously, with a lot of the coaches we've spoken to, they're all in agreement saying that that is not enough to develop, all-rounded or well-rounded football players. So when you do have the option of doing individual training to fix these weaknesses in the game, in a player's game, how vital is that for the player's development versus, let's say, an extra team session?
Yeah, do you know, I think it's critical, and that's something that the club are really driven on. So I think firstly that I totally agree with your point, and in Scotland as well, very, very similar. Most players or most teams will train kind of 2-3 nights a week, and that's important, but it's not enough. I'm sure you will have heard of the kind of 10,000 hour rule when it comes to being an expert in anything. I know there's a lot of pros and cons for that, but I think the general purpose behind it, and that the more hours you train, the better chance you have of becoming an expert in that field. That rings true. But the training has to be consistent, and the training has to be specific. And when you start to look at players who are coming through, every player is going to have strengths and weaknesses. And the key thing for us is identifying an individual development program for each and every player that comes through the academy. And then their strengths, you want them to become super strengths, and the weaknesses, you want to improve them. And the only way you can do that is by having individualised training at certain points. So to give you an example, William McNabb, who's head of the children's programme at Celtic, really big on having individualised training sessions during the week. So if you can imagine 3 team training sessions, say Monday, Wednesday, Friday night, for example, every night, say it could be like 12, 13, 14 players will train as a team, but for 30 or 40 minutes, 2 players will drop out, and those 2 players will do individual practice. Mm-hmm. And then the following night, again, 12, 13, 14, depending upon what the training structure is, and another couple of players will drop out. Because we'll always have dual coaches when we're working at Celtic, so we can have one coach can take 14, 15 players, another coach can step out with 2 or 3 players, and do something that's really specific. And what they work on is essentially designed by the coach, but will be drawn up by the coach and the player, because also the coach can give their experienced opinion as to what the player needs to work on. But if you're going to get a player to buy into individual training, they have to take a little bit of ownership of it. So they have to have the ability to speak to the coach and tell the coach what they think they need to work on. And once you get their buy-in, it becomes far easier for them. And actually then allows them to recognise what they think they need to do better, but also what needs to be their super strength. And then that will hopefully encourage them to go away and work on it, because again, if they're only training 3 or 4 times during the week, that's still not really going to be enough if they want to be top of the game. We're also very fortunate again at Celtic that we have the schools programme, so when players are stepping into the 11-side game and going through high school from the ages of 12 to 16, they're training once a day during school, and then they'll be training, I think, three times a week with the team. So they're getting a lot of hours, but again, a lot of that programme's individual. So one of the key things you should find when players come through a setting like that is that they might go into that schools programme being a left-footed player, but they come out of that programme with the ability to play with both feet.
Yep. For
example. So individual training is really key, and it's probably one of the trends that we've seen in Scotland. I've certainly seen over the last couple of years a lot of coaches kind of starting their own businesses as one-to-one coaches, and I almost think it's become fashionable to an extent to if you're a coach to have your own one-to-one programme, and players will come down. Now, I'm actually not a big fan of one-to-one training personally. I think it can be quite tough on the player. I think small group training is far better. So 2, 3, 4 players, and that allows you to maybe be a little bit more creative with your practices. It allows the players to have a little bit of rest, because anytime you're practicing for 45 minutes to an hour straight on your own, it can become really tiring. You find the quality can dip quite quickly. So even if you're working in a practice where there's two players, if I've got 5 repetitions of dribbling 10 yards, striking in a goal, coming back to get the next ball, I'll do that 5 times. It takes me 30 seconds, 45 seconds. That's quite hard work. So I can then rest, the next player has their goal, and that allows the quality of what I deliver to be far better. So as I said, the small group practices, the individual training, it's definitely really, really key how it's run, and it's a big part of what we do at the club. But equally, we want our players, as I said, to take ownership of it so that they go away and practice off their own accord as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, look, I think that's 100% spot on, and that's been my experience as well. You can have an individual session with a player, pull them aside, middle of the training session, have the other coach deal with the team, and then work that player super duper hard. And I've seen coaches do it all the time. Work that player super duper hard, thinking that putting in the additional hard work is going to benefit them, but then they come back the next day for another training session and they're absolutely spent.
Yeah.
And the quality comes off.
Yeah, I think it's just about making training specific. Again, my experience of coaching and coach education in Scotland for the last 12 years is I see a lot of generalisation. So coaches will put on generic sessions. So it guarantees players activity for an hour and a half on a training night, but there's nothing really specific within that. And again, when I go back to my experience when I was working with national teams, it was always very, very specific. So training may be broken down into units of the pitch, for example, our half, their half. It might be individual players that were coming out. It might be that we had 11 players playing a game. We had 4 subs go on who played 30 minutes. So the following day they couldn't train because they're on a recovery program, but we've still got 5 or 6 players we have to work with. So we're down to that small group practice. So what's the makeup of those 5 or 6 players? What positions do they play? What area of the pitch do they play in? And then can we build a training session around them that's really specific to their needs? And that's the key part. And again, the staff in the Celtic are excellent. The academy staff, all really well qualified, really strong in terms of their experience. So have that ability to go and make that practice specific. And that's the key thing. And don't get me wrong, there are nights for having just a generic training session. I think sometimes when players are mentally fatigued, the last thing they want is a coach to be on them for 90 minutes, trying to develop them, trying to pass on information that they have to then absorb and put into practice. Sometimes when there's maybe a little bit of mental fatigue, you just want to put on something quite light, quite generic, where there's no real thought process involved, something the players can go and enjoy. And again, that just gives them that chance to kind of switch off a little bit. And again, that's for the coach to recognise. We'll all, if you're playing football and you're going through the season, we all know that there will be parts of the season where things can be quite stressful. It might be that you have a run of games, in a really short window because you're playing midweek games. It might be cup games that are added in. You might be coming to the tail end of the season where things are stressful. You're still competing in competition. So there's a whole host of factors that can make certain points in the season quite stressful. And again, you have to have that experience as a coach to recognise when to make training a little bit light, but when you can make it really specific and really beneficial for the player.
Absolutely. In terms of Australian players, now you have mentioned that there has been, a few players who have played in Scotland. Tom Rogic being obviously the prime example with Celtic. There's also has been Aaron Moy, who also played in Scotland before moving to Australia and then over to Brighton Hove Albion. Now, the question I have is, in terms of the perception of Aussie players with Scottish coaches and the Scottish public generally, how do those two groups perceive an Australian player?
Yeah, for me, it's not even so much an Australian player. When I think of Australia, one of the first things that jumps out to me is just how competitive they are at sport in general. I'm watching the Olympics at the moment, and there was a clip going viral of one of the Aussie coaches celebrating the win of the athlete, and that for me is exactly how we look at Australian people when they're competing in sport. Extremely competitive, really athletic. They've got that winning mentality, which is really, really key. And then when you then think specifically around about football or soccer, the game's grown in Australia. You've now got a really strong competitive league. And then when I chat to all of our partner clubs who are working within the communities around Australia, and they're telling me about the size of their programme, the number of players they have playing, and players who are competing both at the community level, but also then at kind of representative level for the state. The game's really, really growing. And anytime you merge those two kind of facets, you're going to have an environment where players can go and develop. And given that you now have some really, really strong professional clubs who will have really good professional coaches and a really professional environment, you're now going to provide an opportunity for young players from Australia to become really, really top players. Now, I don't know the makeup of the Australian national team very well at the moment. I know there are a couple of young players that are coming through, but when you look at the players that are playing for Australia, they're currently plying their trade all over the globe. Obviously, there's a lot of them who are playing in the Australian domestic league, but there are a lot of players playing all around the globe. I mean, we have, as I said, Tom Rogic at Celtic. You've got Martin Boyle, who plays at Hibs. There's the two players in Scotland. And I know Hibs had Jamie McLaren, who was at Hibs a couple of years ago, and I think is now back playing in Australia somewhere. I'm not too sure who for. I'm pretty sure he moved back there. So, yeah, as I said, fantastically competitive, good athletes, great mentality, and you now have a really strong professional game to provide players the opportunity to go and develop.
I mean, with just in addition to that, though, so obviously there is the athleticism, the competitive nature. Is there something that you feel that let's say, young Aussie players, is there something that they lack when you compare them to players from Europe, or something that they can improve on?
No, I find it quite difficult for me to answer that personally, because I haven't had a chance to get my feet on the ground in Australia since I started in this role. As I said, I've been in this role now for around about 16 months. I started day one of lockdown. So as I said, my role is to head up a team of staff that work internationally, and the most international place I've been so far is Clydebank, which sits just outside of Glasgow. I haven't had a chance to get on a plane yet. So it's quite difficult for me because I haven't had a chance to actually go on the pitch and work with our Australian partners and see what the players are like. I can't imagine there will be one specific thing they would be lacking on. I just think the world is massive. I've got some friends who stay in Australia, and I've been over a couple of times to visit them, and been over for work as well when I was scouting for the women's national team. And for me, it's not that there's something lacking, and that's maybe why you don't see enough of it. It's probably just opportunity, because it is just such a long way away from Scotland. You're talking 24 hours of travel to get there. So yeah, as I said, I don't think there's one facet I could look on and say that's what they really need to work on. I think for any young player who's looking to make it as a professional, I think regardless of where they come from, they really need to focus on, one, a commitment to training and getting hours on the pitch to make sure that they're technically good or technically great, maybe. They have to be tactically adept, and they have to understand the game, but they also have to spend the same amount of hours in the gym to become a really strong athlete. And that's not always about being big and tall. it's just playing to the strengths that they have. So whether it's speed, whether it's agility, whether it's strength, they just have to make sure that they go and utilise those strengths. And then the last part for me, or one of the last parts, is then making sure that mentally they have the resilience to become a professional player, because any young player coming through any kind of professional setup in any sport, they're going to take a lot of bumps along the way, and you have to be resilient enough to deal with those bumps, learn from them, and then grow beyond them, as opposed to letting that bump in the road derail you, set you back, and then you maybe drop out of sport. So that's really, really key. And then if I think to players who, as I said, are living in Australia, I think if we're thinking about all those things I've just discussed, and then the next part for me, if they're looking to move out of Australia and into Europe or across to Scotland, it's about being ready to accept an opportunity that comes up, that is put in front of you, and not worrying too much about the what ifs, and then thinking about the negative part of it. I'm going to be really far away from my family. I'm not going to know anyone. I maybe don't know the language. How am I going to go? How am I going to settle in? You've just got to try and take the opportunity. And as long as you've put the work in on the pitch and in the gym, and you've understanding that mentally it's going to be quite a challenge, but you're hoping you're going to be strong to deal with it, I think you put all those things together, then you might just be lucky enough to have that chance, and then be ready to grab that chance when it comes your way.
Beautiful. Well, I mean, my next question was going to be focusing about advice you might have for young players who dream of playing professionally, but I mean, you've covered quite a bit of it. Do you have anything else that you have seen that has been kind of like part of a recipe of a young player who's made it professionally?
A lot of it comes down to attitude, mindset. It sounds so silly. Every player, any player that's going to play professional has to have a certain level of technical skill, tactical awareness, and kind of athletic development. That's a part, because it's a physical sport, and we play it with teammates, so we have to have those three elements. But I've seen so many players who have those three elements, and you're probably the same when you're coming through school. I could list off 3 or 4 players that I played with at high school who were physically great, technically the best players in school, like understood the game brilliantly, but never ever made it as a professional player because they didn't have the right attitude and right mindset. And that mental part of the game is so important. And we have full-time psychologists at the club who work with both our first team and our male and female players right the way down through the academy. And when you strip it back at a basic level, when you're working with young players in their academy, say under 12, what we're looking to try and do is build their confidence. And we're trying to make sure they develop a little bit of resiliency, make sure that they can start to plan and set goals for themselves. And that's basic mental training at a really young age. And that is so important, because when they get to 16, if they sign a professional, 14, 15, 16, when they're on the cusp of signing that professional contract, and even if they do sign it at 16, you still have to try and break in at the first team. You still have to play through the 18s, get into the B team, and then get to the first team. So you've got a couple of jumps to go, mate, and there's going to be some hurdles and going to be some really difficult times. And the further up the ladder you go, the more pressure is put upon you. So you have to have, firstly, a really good attitude. So you're doing everything you possibly can to be in the best position to be picked by the team. And that comes down to your sleep, your hydration, your nutrition, how you live your lifestyle away from the pitch. We know how much scrutiny there is on players now via social media, and how easy it is to get caught out doing something you shouldn't. So you need to make sure that you're living your life in the best possible way. And then on top of all of that, you have to be able to take the toughness that's going to come, because when you get to that level, demands are put on you, and again, you have to be resilient enough to deal with those demands. So yeah, attitude, mindset, that's probably the part that separates the good players and those who are top level.
Absolutely. That's fantastic advice. And I think in particular with things like social media, because it is becoming such a massive part of everyone's life, I think that is something that players just generally don't think too much about, because they always have developed this mindset, oh, well, it's my social media page, it's not a big deal. I don't see anything problematic about that post. But obviously, as you mentioned, as they build up these habits, if that forms a bad habit within them, if they are fortunate enough to be that very, very small minority that do make it professionally, then suddenly they're in a position of being a role model for future footballers. So setting that trend can be kind of like an ongoing cycle of just promoting bad habits and bad behaviors, I guess. So I think it is extremely vital to make players, young players in particular, understand that they're choices and their actions do carry weight and do carry consequences.
Yeah, they absolutely do. And again, that then for me falls on the coaching staff, falls on the support staff to make sure that the players have the right support and make sure that we create the right environment for that. The mental health has been a really big topic of discussion over the last 18 months, I think in the main due to COVID and the stress and strain that's put on a lot of people. You only again have to look at the Olympics. I'm watching yesterday, and Simone Biles, like probably the greatest ever gymnast, has stepped away from competing in this year's Olympics because of our mental health. So for somebody at that level to come out and speak openly about that topic, I think shows just how prominent it is and just how aware we have to be of it. And there's so many things that can affect a player's mental health. And again, if I think back to the club and I think back to what we do at the academy and the support players are given and support families are given through coaching staff, through support staff, then you've got to just make sure now that it's not just about what they do on a pitch, but you've got to be a wee bit more holistic and a wee bit more rounded in terms of how you develop that environment for the young player.
Absolutely, absolutely. And finally, if you were to give advice for coaches who dream of perhaps coaching in Scotland or in Europe, what would some of that advice be?
Do you know, I don't think coaching is too dissimilar to playing in the sense that when we look to develop players, we tell them you need to get on the pitch, you need to get hours with the ball at your feet. Coaching's no different. You have to coach, you have to get on the pitch, you have to work with groups, and it doesn't really matter what age groups you work with. Again, if I think to my journey as a coach, I never played professional, got to a kind of semi-pro level, so had a pretty strong experience of playing, but I was a semi-professional, but I never really had any strong coaches. But I started coaching myself when I was 16. My last year at high school was coaching the first year high school football team, and then kind of went into college and then university to do a coaching degree. So I started off working with really young players, a lot of mini kickers like 3, 4, 5-year-olds, and then coming through my children's coaching certificates into my adult certificates. And then obviously I've worked through to work at a national team level. So I think the experiences I had in the early part of my coaching career, where I was working as a part-time coach, taking school teams, community centres, school programmes, some development squads, all those hours massed allowed me to develop the skill set of coaching, which essentially is planning, organisation, picking the right practices, understand how to put them together so the session flows, understand how to adapt your practice if something goes wrong, making sure you know what your plan A is, your plan B, your plan C, how you communicate, how you intervene in your sessions. All those skill sets I developed working with a whole range of players and a range of squads and a range of programs. And if you want to become a good coach, for me, that's what you need to go and do. There becomes this, I don't know, this want to be an A licensed coach working at the 11-a-side game with professional players straight away. But the reality is there's only a really small number of coaches who step in at that level. And generally it's those who played the professional game and have that real top experience of being in and around it. But again, I think back to going through some of my coaching certificates and going on courses with a lot of professional coaches. And what was really interesting, there was two or three ex-players who'd come on those courses who were excellent, just because they'd been exposed to such high level of knowledge and content for their whole career, and had been switched on enough to listen and learn from it. And actually, before they come on the course, they spent a little bit of time maybe working with some of the youth teams at their club. They were really, really top level coaches, and that was them just starting out. But there was a lot of pro players who were coming into it who, again, understood the game really well, but what I call the kind of the logistical side of coaching, which is how you set your session up, how do you intervene, how do you pick your practices, how do you understand how they flow, that part of it they didn't quite have because they didn't have the hours on the pitch. So again, quite a long-winded answer, but for any coach who's looking to make it as a professional coach anywhere in the world, get those hours on the pitch, get coaching, start to pick up that skill set. And then if you can caveat that with going through some coach education with your national governing body, and then add that into maybe doing some additional learning online, for example, that can kind of maybe go and work specifically in a certain area that you think you have a weakness, then again, like, add all that together and you're going to give yourself a really good chance of becoming a coach.
Absolutely. That's fantastic advice. And it's for a young coach such as myself, it gives me a lot to take away, and obviously lots of food for thought in terms of future developments and continuing to learn. So Chris, thank you so much for your time tonight. It was lovely chatting to you. And we wish you all the best for the upcoming season, and with all of your football academy developments and endeavors. And hopefully once COVID is all settled, we'll be able to maybe touch base one day when you come to Australia for a visit.
Yeah, that'd be good. Hopefully, I say hopefully it's not too far away. I know the Australian government have got a ban on people coming into the country who aren't Australian citizens at the moment, so it might be 6 months, 12 months before we can get down there. We don't quite know at the moment. I think the key for us is just trying to continue to engage with our partners online. It's maybe something to link in that we have developed kind of online programs in the areas of coach education, team training and player development over the last kind of 15 months, and that's the route we're going down. And I know we've just been speaking a lot about coach education, but one of the biggest programs we've started is our online coach mentoring program, where you can be mentored by one of our staff for 6 months. So for any coaches who maybe don't have a club, who are maybe struggling to get on the pitch due to lockdown, we have a program designed for that, essentially to try and continue that development, so you're not feeling as though you've wasted 18 months or 2 years of lockdown without actually developing yourself. But no, great to connect. Thanks very much for the opportunity to chat, and yeah, hopefully we can continue the discussion at a later date.
Absolutely. In terms of the coaching development that you guys offer as well, feel free to send it through to us through to one of our social media or LinkedIn pages. Just send us a link to it, and we'll be more than happy to share it amongst our network as well, because we do know quite a few coaches who are looking to, at the very least, get further development during this lockdown. There's not really much time, especially those who don't have clubs. Not really much time and much opportunity for them to get out onto the pitch. So I think there would be quite a few who would be very interested in mentorship during this.
Yeah, I'll do that. I'll send that through. The next intake we have for the mentoring program is in October, and that will run October, November, December, January, February, March, and that's kind of 6 months of one-to-one mentoring plus assignments plus webinars from additional staff members within the club, etc. So I'll definitely send you a link to that and a couple of the other online programs that we have. And if there's any clubs that are interested in partnering, then great, or any coaches that are looking for a little bit of support, then we're happy to help also.
Excellent. Beautiful. Well, guys, thank you very much for joining us today. Please keep an eye out for all the information we're going to send for any coaches that are interested in everything that has been discussed today. Please feel free to let us know, and we'll be more than happy to make the connection for you, and we can get the ball rolling on the whole process as well. So until next time, take care of yourselves, and we'll see you soon.